In this episode, we build a clean, beginner-friendly way to hear acronyms without freezing up, because acronyms are one of the fastest ways a certification exam can make new learners feel like outsiders. The good news is that you do not need to become an acronym collector, and you do not need to memorize every possible abbreviation you might see in the broader AI and audit world. What you do need is a reliable habit for decoding acronyms into meaning, and then linking that meaning to audit thinking so the acronym becomes a helpful shortcut instead of a mental roadblock. Acronyms show up because exams need compact wording, and organizations use them because they save time, but beginners pay the price if nobody teaches the translation. The goal here is to give you an audio-friendly reference you can replay until the most common terms feel familiar, and more importantly, until you understand why each acronym matters in an audit context. Once you can translate quickly, you can focus on the actual question rather than getting stuck on letters. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A strong first step is understanding what an acronym is doing in a question, because it is rarely the core challenge. Most of the time, an acronym is either naming a role, naming a process, naming a document, or naming a control framework. If it names a role, the exam is often testing accountability, decision rights, and oversight. If it names a process, the exam is often testing where you are in the audit workflow and what evidence belongs at that stage. If it names a document, the exam is often testing traceability and proof because documents show intent, approvals, and history. If it names a framework, the exam is often testing alignment to recognized practices, which is a common way auditors evaluate whether an organization is managing risk responsibly. When you approach acronyms with this lens, you stop treating them like vocabulary trivia and start treating them like signposts. That mindset keeps you calm, because you can still reason about the question even if the acronym is not fully familiar. You focus on what category it belongs to and what audit move it implies. Let's begin with the core certification acronym itself, Artificial Intelligence Audit, AAIA. The certification title matters because it tells you the exam is not about building models, and it is not purely about general AI knowledge. It is about evaluating AI initiatives as systems that create risk and require governance, evidence, and oversight. When you see AAIA as the lens, acronyms become easier because you can ask how each acronym affects audit work. An acronym that describes an AI concept matters because it changes the questions you ask about data, performance, and impacts. An acronym that describes governance matters because it changes what approvals, policies, and accountability structures you expect. An acronym that describes risk management matters because it changes how you prioritize findings and recommendations. Keeping the certification lens in mind turns a list of letters into a set of practical tools. Now let's cover a few acronyms that often show up in governance and audit conversations, because these tend to connect strongly to domains and tasks. One common role acronym is Chief Executive Officer, CEO, which matters because executive accountability is often where governance either works or fails. Another is Chief Information Officer, CIO, which matters because technology ownership and enterprise priorities often flow through that role. Another is Chief Information Security Officer, CISO, which matters because security risk, controls, and incident response oversight often require CISO involvement when AI systems touch sensitive data or critical operations. You may also encounter Chief Risk Officer, CRO, which matters because risk governance and risk appetite decisions often sit there. In audit logic, these acronyms are not about prestige, but about knowing who can approve, who can fund, who can accept risk, and who must be informed when an issue is significant. If a question asks about escalation or accountability, role acronyms are usually the clue that you should choose an answer that clarifies ownership rather than one that focuses on technical tuning. Another group of acronyms relates to core security and technology concepts that often surround AI systems, even when the audit focus is broader than cybersecurity. A basic one is information technology, IT, which matters because AI systems are typically deployed as part of IT environments that have access controls, logging, and change management processes. Another is operational technology, OT, which matters because AI can be used in physical world systems like manufacturing or energy, where safety and reliability risks can be high. Another is application programming interface, API, which matters because AI services often connect to other systems through API interfaces, creating dependency and data exposure concerns. Another is software development lifecycle, SDLC, which matters because AI systems should still follow disciplined development and change practices, even if the model itself feels different from traditional software. When you see these acronyms, think about integration points, data flows, and operational controls, because those are common audit concerns. The letters are less important than the idea that AI lives in an environment with other systems and processes. Risk and compliance acronyms also appear frequently, and beginners can handle them by tying them to the idea of standards and evidence. One is Key Performance Indicator, KPI, which matters because organizations measure success using KPI values, and auditors evaluate whether those measurements are meaningful and aligned to objectives. Another is Key Risk Indicator, KRI, which matters because KRI values are designed to signal when risk is rising, and for AI systems, KRI choices can include drift signals, error rates, or unusual outcome patterns. Another is Service Level Agreement, SLA, which matters because AI systems may be part of services with promised response times or performance requirements, and failures can become business-impacting incidents. Another is Risk and Control Self-Assessment, or CSA, which matters because organizations sometimes use structured self-assessments to document risk and controls, and auditors may evaluate whether those assessments are realistic or overly optimistic. For these, the audit question is often, what is being measured? Why is it being measured? And how does the organization respond when the measurement looks bad? Acronyms here are shortcuts to the idea of measurable expectations and structured oversight. Now let's connect acronyms to AI concepts in a way that supports Domain 1 tasks without turning into a technical lecture. One common term is machine learning, ML, which is a category of AI where systems learn patterns from data rather than being explicitly programmed with every rule. Another is deep learning, DL, which is a kind of ML that uses layered structures to learn complex patterns, often requiring large data and computational resources. Another is natural language processing, NLP, which involves working with human language, such as understanding text, summarizing, or answering questions. Another is computer vision, CV, which involves interpreting images and video, such as recognizing objects or detecting anomalies. In audit terms, these acronyms matter because they hint at what kind of data is involved and what kinds of risks may appear. For NLP systems, risks can include misinterpretation of language, hallucinated content, or privacy exposure in text data. For CV systems, risks can include misclassification, environmental sensitivity like lighting changes, and biased performance across different populations. The acronym is a clue to the system's nature and therefore to your audit questions. You may also encounter acronyms related to data management, which is central to auditing AI because data quality and provenance drive outcomes. One is Extract Transform Load, ETL, which refers to processes that pull data from sources, reshape it, and load it into a system for analysis or model use. Another is Data Loss Prevention, DLP, which refers to controls designed to prevent sensitive data from leaving authorized boundaries. Another is Identity and Access Management, IAM, which refers to how users and systems are identified, authenticated, and authorized. Another is Multi-Factor Authentication, MFA, which strengthens authentication and reduces the risk of unauthorized access to data and systems. In audit logic, these acronyms point toward who can access training data, who can change models, and how sensitive information is protected. Even if you never configure any of these systems, you need to recognize what they imply: controlled access, traceability of actions, and protection of sensitive assets. For beginners, it is enough to connect them to the evidence you would expect, such as access review records, change approvals, and monitoring outputs. Another set of acronyms shows up when people talk about security operations and incident handling, which often matters in Domain 3 thinking about monitoring and response. One is Security Operations Center, SOC, which refers to a team or function that monitors for security events and coordinates response. Another is Security Information and Event Management, SIEM, which is a system that collects and correlates logs to detect suspicious activity. Another is Incident Response, IR, which refers to structured processes for handling security incidents, including detection, containment, and recovery. Another is Business Continuity Plan, BCP, which refers to plans to keep critical business functions operating during disruptions. In AI auditing, these acronyms may show up when an AI system is involved in critical operations or sensitive data handling, because failures or compromises can have real business impact. When you see these acronyms, think about preparedness, monitoring, escalation, and documentation of actions taken. The exam often rewards answers that emphasize disciplined response processes rather than improvised fixes. Framework and control acronyms can be intimidating because they sound like official structures, but beginners can treat them as references to organized best practices. One is National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, which is a source of security and risk guidance that organizations often align to. Another is International Organization for Standardization, ISO, which is associated with standards that define management system expectations, including information security and other governance topics. Another is Control Objectives for Information and Related Technologies, COBIT, which is a governance framework commonly associated with IT governance and control thinking. Another is Generally Accepted Privacy Principles, GAPP, which is a framework concept used in privacy governance discussions. You do not need to memorize every detail of these frameworks to benefit from seeing the acronym, because the exam point is often that alignment to recognized practices strengthens governance and provides structured evidence. If an answer option suggests mapping controls to a framework, that is usually a clue that the auditor is seeking a systematic approach rather than ad hoc choices. The key is to understand what frameworks provide: consistency, shared language, and a basis for evaluating completeness. A practical audio habit for acronyms is to use a two-step translation. First, translate letters into the full term, then translate the full term into the audit implication. For example, when you hear IAM, you translate it into Identity and Access Management, IAM, then you ask what that means for an AI audit, which is who can access sensitive data and who can modify systems. When you hear KRI, you translate it into Key Risk Indicator, KRI, then you ask what that means for an AI audit, which is whether the organization has early warning signals and defined responses. This habit prevents acronyms from becoming dead vocabulary, because every acronym immediately produces a question you can ask and evidence you can seek. It also keeps you from overreacting when you encounter a new acronym, because you know how to approach it. You can often infer meaning from context, and you can still choose the best audit action by focusing on governance, evidence, and risk. Over time, the most common acronyms stop feeling like code and start feeling like shortcuts. Another important point is that acronyms can be used carelessly by stakeholders, and the exam may test whether you stay grounded when that happens. A stakeholder might say the model is fine because it uses ML or because it is aligned to NIST, but an auditor does not accept that as proof. The auditor asks for evidence that the practices are actually implemented and effective, not just referenced. Similarly, a vendor might use acronyms to sound credible, but credibility must still be verified through documentation, testing results, and control evidence. Beginners sometimes assume that an acronym equals authority, and that can lead to the wrong answer choice if the exam presents an option that relies on trust. The better answer is usually the one that asks for validation, documentation, and monitoring. This is one of the biggest reasons acronyms matter in an audit exam. They are often used as signals of maturity, and the auditor's job is to confirm that maturity is real. As we wrap up, remember that the point of this glossary episode is not to drown you in letters, but to give you a stable way to hear them without losing your place. Acronyms are part of the language of governance and technology, and you will encounter them in domains and tasks because they compress complex ideas into short labels. Your job is to translate them into meaning and then into audit questions about accountability, requirements, controls, monitoring, and evidence. If you practice the two-step translation habit, acronyms become easier each time you hear them, because you stop treating them as separate facts and start treating them as cues for reasoning. That reasoning is what the exam is really measuring, especially in scenario questions where multiple options sound reasonable. In the next episode, we will do a similar job for essential terms, focusing on plain language definitions that support fast recall and clear audit thinking. When you can move smoothly between terms, acronyms, and audit logic, you are building the confidence that beginners need to succeed.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.